tough conversations is a must in any organization. And as a leader specifically, can be a challenge to navigate. I think that is one of the reasons why we've built such a great team, is because the expectation early on is set, to one that, performance is important, but that's not the only thing. We often find that when we have those hard conversations, the biggest thing that shines through is being authentic about it and understanding that this is nothing new.
Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Management Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Muela, and today I have Justin Clements from Pest Share. Justin, thanks for coming in.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. So I'm excited to chat, and I want to start off with today. Can you tell me a little bit about what Pest Share is up to right this very minute?
Right this very minute. Well, we're at a conference at this moment, and we're at one of the IMN conferences, which always seem to be great networking opportunities and sales opportunities. But at this moment, Pest Share as a company, we're grinding. We're building product. We are, we have several releases and updates that we're kind of working on and just rolling out. We've kind of broken down a lot of our roadmap and made it into more, bite-sized chunks by way of making sure that we continue to, release product in a timely manner, features, updates, things like that. So that's been a good, look back of the year is we've been kind of building up to this point, and we're finally at the point to where a lot of these products are now starting to release.
And so for those that don't know, in a nutshell, what is Pest Share?
Pest Share is essentially an on-demand pest control amenity that we've built into the lease for property managers that give access to residents or access to professional pest control requests for residents, essentially. And so if you think about it, and we use this lightly, but if you think about it in the most relatable terms, as insurance for pest control. So residents have the ability to, if they have a bed bug issue or, some sort of invasive, roach issue, they have the ability to use our technology, our software, right on their phone to request professional pest control. And then we utilize our vendor network throughout the nation to match, the needs of the resident to, the remediation necessary. And we dispatch those out, and we're end-to-end solution for the resident, and the property manager benefits ultimately in a number of ways. Reduced incoming issues, having to, facilitate the calls, find vendors that are going to be reputable, dispatch them, make sure that they get it done on time. So it's a lot of headache that's reduced from them because we take that on, and we're very niche in that regard. We focus on one thing, but we do that very intentionally because we want to be the best at it. So.
Can you contrast this against the status quo prior to Pest Share? What is the default status quo in the industry?
Yeah, well, the default is kind of 100 years running, and it's traditional pest control. And most of what traditional pest control lacks is really opening up into, why we're in this space in general. Traditional pest control is built and has been built over the last 100+ years for residential ownership. And so that being said, a lot of it is quarterly maintenance cycles, things that are just the typical creepy crawlies, the spiders, the ants, the things that come relatively seasonally. What often happens is there's kind of this disparity between the resident's expectation, when they're in a home. It's not necessarily their asset, so there's less motivation to maintain that property as far as the asset goes. And then the property manager is caught in between because there's always this friction of who's going to deal with the pest control issue when it arises. But we often see that, especially when it comes to the invasive things. Traditional pest control doesn't cover the invasive issues, those super spreaders, the cockroaches, the bed bugs, and those are oftentimes the most expensive to remediate. You're talking $1,000, $2,000 a pop when you're talking bed bugs or roaches or things like that. And so often the resident, in that demographic doesn't often have, who has $1,000 that they can just have on hand when that issue arises. And so I think that the issue with traditional pest control is number one, they don't catch it fast enough, and number two, they don't cover a lot of those things. So when it comes to those quarterly maintenance cycles, which is really what it's been built on, it's just for the common area pests. But when you get into the other more invasive species, or those specialty pests, what we call them, they're in addition to, instead of it being inclusive, with that. So that's kind of what we're aiming to help resolve, is alleviate the tension between property manager and resident, give them the opportunity to really understand who's responsible for the pest. So there is a lot of clarity around it. Oftentimes it's built in the lease, but residents often don't read the lease, right? They just kind of sign the renewal, or they sign up and they're said and then when the issue comes up, they come to the property manager, upset, and then the property manager says, no, that's your responsibility. And then, there's that friction again. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to achieve ultimately is we're basically building out clarity, and then ease of access to a lot of these specialty pests. So,
and what kind of liability is there for the owner in a situation where the tenant chooses not to do the necessary pest control simply to save money?
Yeah, great question. So previously that has been the case in many cases when an issue arises, let's call it bed bugs or whatnot. And those are, one of the super spreader, types of pests. And so what happens is, if the resident is responsible, they know that it's going to be expensive, and they don't have a solution already built in, then they oftentimes will sit on the issue, and, they'll wait for it to get bad enough, and it either cause churn, it'll cause them to turn, or it'll just continue to exacerbate and get worse and worse and worse until either, somebody is forced to act in that. And so as an investor, an owner of a property, it starts to cause issues with the asset itself. And so then it not only just becomes more expensive to remediate, but then ultimately it starts to, become an issue to the quality of the asset itself. You talk about bed bugs or mice or whatnot, and those are the types of things that will, chew through wiring, and they'll cause extensive damage to the property if they're not dealt with quick enough. And so the idea here is we provide the access to be able to give the residents, and knowing that it's already built into their lease, they're paying a small monthly fee for access to that. They don't have to come up with $1,000 when it arises. They know that it's their responsibility. They're not paying much, with that monthly fee. And so ultimately when it comes up, then they're much more willing to head off the issue instead of allowing it to continue to build and then cause further damage either to the asset or deplete the resident experience.
What are they paying out of pocket? Is the entire expense covered when they have an event, or is it a partial?
Absolutely. So on a covered event, ultimately that covered event is based off of the package that the property manager decides. And so oftentimes what we'll do is we'll work with the property manager to say, okay, what are the common issues? And so again, we take those invasive, types of pests, and they're all automatically built in. And then when they've chosen that package, gets built into their lease. Then ultimately, when the resident has an issue, they're paying $9, $15, whatever that monthly charge looks like based off of that package, and they automatically have the ability to have access to it, once that door is activated. So,
and how do you QA the vendors on the ground, and what kind of challenges have you had with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has been a challenge. Building a vendor network is not easy, especially in like the service type industry. There's a lot of nuances to how people run their businesses, and actually, we have a fantastic service ops department, and our director of service ops has been really good at making sure that there's clarity around what is the intention going out to these, because they're different from traditional pest control. We have built and designed the product and the work order process to be very clear, very intentional with what they're going to do. And so when we deliver that to the vendor is essentially just going out, performing the service, making sure that all is well, essentially, and that's it. They don't have to, hassle with resident. The resident doesn't have to hassle with the vendor, because oftentimes there's friction there, and so we want to make sure that we're kind of keeping all of that at bay, as much as we can.
So you're effectively providing lead gen for that side of the industry.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a in the rental space, that whole side of the real estate market is virtually untouched. And a lot of times it's untouched is because the renter is the most immediate person or point of contact. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, again, because there is either lack of clarity or because it's not their asset, there's no motivation to have that pest control, taken care of. And so we ultimately believe that professional pest control is the best way to remediate anything, any type of pest issue, rather than kind of the DIY situation or whatnot. Oftentimes we find that exacerbates the issue. But professional pest control is, ultimately why we're here, because we're from that industry. So back to QA, how do you know if somebody did a bad job, and what do you do if they did? Yeah. Our QA process ultimately comes back into, managing, especially when it comes to our vendors. We often, especially after, we will survey the resident, and we'll survey the vendor, and we'll survey the PM, making sure that the perception of that, more of that qualitative, data is captured, just to make sure that their perception of what the treatment was, the customer service quality, the quality of treatment itself, that ultimately is a number of items that we check with the those sources that are actually involved with it. So, to what degree are you having to build an actuarial model to understand the frequency of the incidence of pest-related issues? Yeah, that is a great question, actually. So that's something that we have been building in our back end for quite some time. And this is actually bringing a lot of new light to the pest control industry in itself, but also to the residential rental pest control industry, because it's a very new category that, again, traditional pest control has not touched very effectively. And so there's a lot of data that's kind of circling around, and we're starting to capture a lot of that information as, frequency of pest types, like how does spreading happen throughout the nation, and so we can actually understand a lot more of within the rental segment. How do we care? Like you hear about these outbreaks, if you will, in France or in New York or whatnot. How does that happen? Where does it originate? And it's nearly impossible to originate. But if we can track the information, the data, the work order history, we can start to see, where does it start to kind of cross those barriers, those lines. Now, again, staying within our niche, that's been a really enticing focus for us to really start diving into the data, because we believe that will always translate back to the property manager to be able to elevate the resident's experience and make sure that the packages or the inclusions or the way that we're delivering the service are ultimately for the benefit of the resident. And then you have obviously the down chain or ancillary benefits that property manager, asset manager, the investor, they're all benefiting from the fact that we're focused on the resident's experience and making sure that their tenure is pleasurable. So Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had a background in the industry, specifically in the pest control side. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah. Actually, all three of us, my other co-founders, Tom Clements, Landon Cooley, and myself, we all have spent decades in the traditional pest control industry. Actually, I want to say Landon, who actually was on one of your podcasts before, is fourth generation pest control, and so Tom and I's roots don't go so deep. We've been in probably for 20, 25 years ish now.
Lightweights.
Lightweights compared to four generations. Yeah. But lots of experience ultimately. And again, in the traditional space, that's kind of how we've been able to kind of build this domain of expertise within, and we've been able to kind of identify, what's lacking within, the space in general as far as like a holistic approach.
What did you see? Was there a moment? Was there an inflection point? Was it years of experience culminating with a general thesis?
Yeah, actually, funny enough, we Tom and I had several pest control branches, small branches. In college we started in sales, specifically, and so and then Landon kind of grew up in pest control, but he kind of grew up learning how to operate, how to run the business. His dad actually was obviously one that kind of mentored him through that, and then at a point in time, Landon took over his dad's company, and then Tom and I, when we moved into the same valley, because we're originally from Washington State, when we moved into the Boise Valley to start our company there locally, we were actually competitors in the traditional pest space. And then, let's say 5-6 years down the road, we had built up a company to where we were both, relatively, equally sized or whatnot, and we had met each other. I want to say it was like through an acquisition letter that is typically sent out. I want to say Landon sent it out, and so we reached out and we were like, well, hey, we're not interested in selling, but hey, let's have a conversation. We're always willing to have a conversation with anybody. And long story short, we kind of hit it off. We had very similar visions. We had very similar methodologies of approaching business and kind of that philosophy. And how we ran the companies, what was the vision for the future of like that valley in particular, and we decided to merge actually, and so that's kind of where our relationships, intertwined, and then Landon was actually running a small like pilot with Jim and Melissa Sharon. Actually, they're from First Rate Property Management, and so they kind of came to him and said like, "Hey, look, we need to figure this out." He was actually a vendor for them in the NARPM space, and so the National Association of Residential Property Management. So we, when we merged, there was a small pilot program that was kind of just a very like rudimentary, almost back shelf type of thing. It was kind of, just there were bigger fish to fry at that moment. And then, once we had kind of, streamlined the merger, the dust all ultimately settled, we noticed that there was this small program, and it was like, what is this? And so then it was like, it's something that we've been trying to do with, NARPM or whatnot. And so we're like, well, let's dust this book off and let's see if it's got any legs. And actually, Jim and Melissa were the ones that really pushed us to bring this nationally. So we decided, we're like, okay, well, what does it need to have to be scalable and actually to take it on a national scale? And so we did, we run off of an EOS program and ultimately kind of went through our VTO, and their end result ultimately kind of was one that we said, what, let's take the leap. And so our first conference back in 2020 was a broker owner out in Connecticut, and we were just coming off of COVID. It was still masks on, and we were just so naive to the space, and it was a lot of fun. Looking back, we were just kind of like, what were we doing? And we had no idea what to expect or even what to pitch, really. But it was a great opportunity. Turns out, yeah.
I think that was it, right?
Something like that. It was
in rural Connecticut at a casino.
Yes, that's right. That's what it was. Yeah, it was at that casino, and it was just such a new experience. Like, we were total fish out of water, and but we went into it like as true sales oriented. We've always been very sales forward, sales oriented, and just went to learn, really, and found out that everything we were pitching was wrong. And so we came back, we regrouped, and continued forward. And much like everything else,
business, right?
Just has iterations. Yeah.
Series of ass kickings to see who can adjust the most times.
That's right.
Get what's wanted.
And we've had our fair share. Yeah.
Tell me, what's been one of the hardest things thus far? What's been one of the hardest moments in this journey thus far?
I think the speed has been one of the most difficult things. We're a venture-backed company, and that's when we were very, very skeptical to take outside money because we come from the small business world, and that's known, that's comfortable, and the speed of growth is very different in that setting. You have large amounts of capital that you can pour into it, and it's a matter of like when and where. But I think the speed to which we have grown has been something that's both very exciting, but it's been a lot different than your traditional SMB. And, for better, for worse, but I think that's been a big learning curve for us as we've continued to grow. But it's made us expand, and it's gotten us out of our comfort zone. And I'd say for the better, really, it's been a really meaningful experience, I think, for all of us, because we have also been forced to really focus on the complements that we play, especially as co-founders. We all kind of carry a relatively unique perspective, different perspectives, complementing perspectives, and that's what we really have had to lean on as well, so that we can kind of use that as, let's say, a superpower than it is a crutch. Having three butting heads, we actually work extremely well in the sense of making sure that we have the right checks and balances, we have the right opposing perspectives, and that has really allowed us to work with the speed and kind of keep up with the growth of the company. So,
related to growth, let's talk about forecasting. Bottoms up, top down. Bottoms up is, here are the things that we know, we think we can do. What does it add up to? Top down is, this is what the target will be, and we will find out a way to hit it. What has been y'all's the evolution of your approach over time to forecasting as it relates to growth?
That's a great question. So it's been a lot of I would say until a couple of years ago or so, it's been a really top-down approach. And so it's been mostly, let's go, again, being very sales-oriented. We wanted to kind of go out and just hit the market hard, capture, what we could identify as product market fit. And that product market fit is really important, especially in the space and the path that we're on, because that allows us to continue to raise capital really well. And we've been very fortunate in that regard. The transition that we're starting to see now as a company is that, we've been seeing this for a while, but the transition that we've been moving towards is more of that bottoms-up approach, which is where a lot of the data is starting to come back to. And it really helps us identify more granularly our customer base, the business in itself, and it rolls all up into kind of that top-down, when it comes to the goals that we've set as, we're going to hit these, this revenue goal or whatnot, that ultimately is driven by a lot of our bottom up. And so it's the various metrics that we have that we forecast are a lot based off of a lot of the spend ratios, and we have like a million different ratios that we track from the bottom up approach, so that we can make sure that we're making proper decisions from kind of that top line vision. So if that makes sense.
And how has the finance function evolved overall? Do you guys have a CFO right now? Who's running finance?
We have a director of finance. We're not quite to the point to where we need a CFO, and that's kind of a very top level position that's much more focused on strategy as opposed to it being kind of in the weeds of the. And so that has been a really great way for us to again allow for us to kind of dive into the data. Our finance piece has been mixed in two ways. It's not only been kind of tying you have like all of the financial information, but then you have all your data information, your conversion rates, from funnel metrics all the way down to end delivery of service costs, your cost structuring throughout. What has been really nice is that our director of finance is awesome. She has been connecting the two, and I think that that's been a really key piece for us and very insightful, is being able to tie the revenue in every dollar to every stage that a customer goes through in their journey, and making sure that we're conscious of every stage in those conversions as it goes through allows us to make more pointed decisions when it comes to any given department and how they approach either the customer or the direction and the people and what they're focused on at any given moment. And so to give you an example, like in our CS department, for example, it's client success. They focus a lot on onboarding, adoption, and making sure that the user's experience is top notch. One of those is as breaking that out into relative health scores. And so there's a number of items that we have, both quantitative and qualitative, that we've identified that matter to the customer. And I think that's one of the things that we really focus on, is making sure that the anything that we build, anything that we do is always from the customer's perspective. And so we really kind of take that Steve Jobs approach, but in that regard, when it comes to a lot of the metrics that we're tracking, as far as like data usage, how often they're using it, what are the pest types that they're requesting, that gives us insight on the ability to not only understand the cost structure behind those on any given account, but on a per door basis, we can then report to our property managers that essentially give them insight on what are their properties experiencing on a niche pest level, and then how does that affect their residents' experience? And if it's affecting their residents' experience, it gives them a couple of different things. Are they bringing in the right residents? And because everybody wants the right customer, right? What's ideal for them? Is the resident experience such that that it creates enough tenure to make sure that they're continually happy, they're hitting their renewals, they're renewing on a regular basis, and if we can affect that in essence, then we can essentially prove that we can alleviate them from the most expensive part of property management, which is that turnover, the vacancy, right? So that's kind of been a lot of our goal in tying this all together and wrapping it up in a pretty bow. Right now, it's really messy, but that's been a lot of our intention lately, is to really bring a lot of that information and add that value to the property managers so that they understand and know, okay, in this sense, in this essence, and there's a lot to it. We understand that maintenance as a whole is not just pest control, but in this sense, if we can identify that this contributes to the resident's experience overall, that also contributes to renewal rates, then that ultimately will help the property manager identify and understand who's their true ICP or their ideal resident. And then they'll start to be better at understanding, how do they filter through? How do they sift through all of the applications? Is this the right type of resident I want in the property?
Yeah, that's smart. Everybody's trying to map to the impact to the end user, right? What's the impact to the owner? What's the impact to the tenant? I'm curious how your identity has needed to shift over time as you've gone from a guy who's running a local pest control company to now doing what you're doing currently. What's the headcount right now?
For employee wise,
Yeah.
yeah, we have about 60
So
employees.
60 people and you're acting as CEO. So there's a significant context shift. The folks that you're talking to day to day, catering to has shifted. How has your identity as a leader shifted over time and needed to shift in order to allow you to grow and continue to be effective in your role?
That's a great question, actually. I think we've actually always been pointed as us as co-founders. We've been very pointed in making sure that we don't change, and I would say that our identity, as far as who we are, how we approach our people, has actually held really strong to the way that we lead in general, and I think that the day-to-day function has probably been the biggest shift as far as like what contributes to our identity, and I think that as all three of us have, again, we kind of use that the three complements as more of a superpower than a crutch, and I think that that's allowed us to be able to allow that let's say the day-to-day function of what we do to help contribute to our identity, rather than it change our identity. And so we're all family men. We don't want to be, we're not the type of people that are, let's say fake, for lack of a better term. I think that, we really want to be authentic, and everything that we do is through the lens of being real and being authentic. And I think that really carries through, and that holds a lot of the way that we lead as leaders. But we lead in different ways. And I think that actually really, again, has been a nice, evolution to the way that we lead is we also have very complementing leadership styles. And I think that that's been kind of a nice evolution to the way that our identities have shifted. Is we've kind of been able to allow ourselves, especially with kind of the way that we divide and conquer, we've been allow ourselves to evolve and develop the way that we lead best, and really kind of highlight those. And so it's been great thus far.
Yeah, when I say identity shifting, I'm getting at the stories that we tell ourselves. For example, if you want a job done right, you got to do it yourself.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's a kind of story that can feel really affirmatory at a certain stage and can really hold you back later on. I know that for me, there's been a lot of stories that have had to shift in order for me to stay relevant and effective. And had I chosen not to, I would have held things back.
Yeah.
I would have bent the opportunity towards me, my comfortability, et cetera. So that's really what I'm just asking.
That's a great perspective there as well, and that is 100%. A lot of the evolution, a lot of the shift in the identity is you're totally right. In traditional SMB, you have that comfort zone. That if you want the job done right, you do it yourself, because oftentimes you're the one that is the best for the job. However, it's really important to hire those like-minded folks so that and I'd say it comes back to your hiring structure as well. And that's one thing that we've really had to lean on, is getting the right people in the right seats. And it's a constant thing. It's not just, hire one person, you're done, and you don't have to, do anything after that. It's really been one that making sure that number one, you're hiring the right people at first, and then those people, as you continue to lead them, you have to step away, right? 80% of the way that you would have done it is, better done through them versus you having to take that on and wear so many different hats. And it would be an impossible task for you to do. So I think the leading as a way of focusing on the organizational structure has been a big shift or an evolution to the way that we manage the company in itself, and understanding that there are 9 different ways to skin a cat, in that regard. And I think that just because you would do it in one way doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. the way that your manager would do it, or the way that your manager manages. If as long as it's effective and it's being done, correctly, ethically, whatnot, then you need to kind of let go of those reins. And it really comes back to more so a matter of making sure that your structure from that top down to bottom up, and that you have enough of those feedback loops. And I've really kind of understood more so as we've continued along this journey, that it's so important for us to have really good communication, really good feedback loops when it comes to reporting, when it comes to knowing what's happening within any given department, and making sure that your leaders are always on the same page with you, so that they're not kind of aimlessly blinded at really nothing. And so we that identity has very much shifted to high level vision, making sure that vision carries throughout the company. And the way that we do that is not by us, it's by us making sure that our leadership is 100% on the same page, so that they can then carry that vision, that culture all the way through the rest of the company.
Culture is a really amorphous thing. It's poorly understood. My conception of culture is that it's just what is. It's what's valued in the organization. It's the way that people relate to one another. I've seen that the idea of trying to manage the culture typically correlates with a kind of leadership that is externalizing what is happening, as opposed to viewing the culture as being the ultimate expression of me as the leader. It's a reflection and a mirror of me. The moment that you think that the culture is separate from you, it's the beginning of contributing to kind of a downward spiral.
Totally agree.
How do you think about the leadership position that you and your co-founders have, and how the correlation between how you're showing up, how you're relating, how you're being, and what's happening in the business?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And I think oftentimes people consider culture as, prizes and incentives and, goodies, swag bags, things like that. And it's very much not the case. That's not necessarily to say that it's not okay to do those things and it's fun to do, but those are fun. That's not culture. And I agree with you that it is more of an identity. It is a leadership method. It is your values. And I think that's one of the things that we really have held strong to, especially as co-founders, is the values carry throughout the rest of the company, because it's a reflection of us, and it goes into our hiring strategy. It goes into who we bring on and why we bring them on. And so I think that is very much a great assessment as to, what that is. And as far as how it kind of correlates, we've noticed as we've continued to grow that really the most effective way that we've been able to grow is really by letting what is be, and what is us spread through the rest of the company. But again, it really comes down to the way that we manage our people, manage our leadership, the way that we approach problems. Every company has problems. And I think your values are what drive you to manage anything a certain way. And so that is your culture. And so, it's one of the big things is that we really focus on is authenticity and, transparency. And anytime we go into a meeting, we leave the ego at the door. And I think that that's one of the things that we've noticed, just that we've done inherently that has carried through the rest of the company, is that collaborative, very respectful, but also, a team mentality, to where, if something goes awry, we're not necessarily jumping down somebody's throat. We're identifying, we're, making corrective action. But ultimately that's, because it doesn't necessarily mean that person is in the wrong seat per se. It just ultimately means that there was a misstep, and missteps, to be correct, everybody makes mistakes. And so we want to make sure that we are providing the safety, the feeling of value still persists, even though you make mistakes, or whatnot. So I think there's that, the way that we approach anybody within the company is what really kind of resonates with the rest of, how we are productive at the end of the day. So
What have you learned about hiring, and how is the way that you relate to hiring and management different today than your first iteration of entrepreneurship with the pest control company?
yeah, that's a great question. It's a totally different, type of person, that we're doing, or that we hire today. In the traditional pest control, it's a service-based business, very blue collar. And so there's a different mentality that is attached to that. And so the way that you approach that versus, let's say, a little bit more of that white collar crowd, it's a less of a just go and do, and more task oriented, as what much of service is, and in this regard, it is much more of how do we solve big problems? How do we break down those problems into more bite-sized chunks? How do we approach these? So there's a lot more fluidity within it instead of it just kind of being directive, solution, go execute solution. It's how do we collaborate in a way that we're able to actually get to the root? We're asking the right questions. And so it requires a little bit of a different type of person than it does, let's say, on that side of it. And so that has been kind of an evolution as well. But I think that's where we get very comfortable is that's kind of the way that we've always been as far as like co-founders go. And I think that's where we really connect with a lot of the people, and that's in that regard as well. So
yeah, I could see that carrying the authenticity coming through for you. How does that manifest itself in performance management and telling someone on occasion that you're working really hard and you're doing the best that you can and it's not enough?
Mm-hmm.
We've taken money. We have these goals. This is non-optional. We need to map towards this. We have an objective standard that cannot be lowered for personal circumstances. How do you handle and navigate that challenging conversation?
Yeah. Tough questions or tough conversations is a must in any organization, and as a leader specifically, that can be a challenge to navigate as well. And I think that, again, I think that is one of the reasons why we've built such a great team, is because the expectation early on is set, to one that, performance is important. Absolutely. There's no question about it, but that's not the only thing that we care about. And we often find that when we have those hard conversations, or we have to approach a conversation knowing that that's going to be an uncomfortable situation for both the leader and, the employee, really the biggest thing that shines through is being authentic about it and understanding that this is nothing new, and I think the clarity around what the expectation is so important to preempt that conversation, because if you don't have clarity about the expectation, what are the metrics, what are their key focuses, and who do they need to be in that position? Because as we all know, different departments require different personalities, different types of people, and they may be suited for one thing versus another. Some very client oriented, very customer friendly, some very, back end, very matter of fact. And I think that understanding that, what is the expectation early on will help ease the conversation when you have to have a hard conversation. But referring to that very early and often has been a really key part in making sure that transparency, that authenticity does shine through, because you can then have a conversation and be more authentic with that person. And by authentic, what I mean is just be honest and truthful, with that employee. If you're having to have a hard conversation, there are no surprises. We both know where we are at right now. So there's no question about why we're sitting across the table from each other. And I know why we're having this conversation. So let's put that aside, because we know that performance needs to improve. Let's now talk about person to person. Why? Is it personal related? Is it a function of how you're feeling in the workspace? Is it because oftentimes what I see is when we get past the performance itself, there's often something underlying that's affecting the performance as a person. And so I think there are certain things that a lot of times leaders may not be willing to dig deep enough to find out the why. And, why is performance lacking? Not just that performance is lacking or it's being, it's trending or whatever that may be, or trending down. Oftentimes the corrective action is something internal as opposed to it being just put more effort in. A lot of times people, especially as leaders I've seen, a lot of times leaders say, well, pick it up, or do this, and oftentimes I don't see it as being a task-oriented thing. It could be a focus thing. It could be a mental thing. It could be an emotional thing. But oftentimes I think that is what we miss as leaders, is understanding the person behind their performance, because the person oftentimes needs to make some subtle change in their lifestyle. They might need a break, or whatever that may be. But something there internally is what's driving the performance either up or down. And I think we could do better as leaders to identify that beyond the performance level.
I see you guys have this really kind of family-oriented ethos and dynamic. How do you reconcile that with the performance culture? Firing grandma isn't generally something that's done in a family. In a business, it becomes necessary. How do you reconcile that close-knit, connected feeling with also boundaries and lines that are unmovable?
That's a great question. Actually, I think, again, it comes into the expectation. We actually early on had removed ourselves. Anybody that we had hired that is related to us, we would remove ourselves from the hiring process in general. And so now the company is obviously to the point to where we don't necessarily have a lot of the direct, let's say the number of interviews that we go through. A lot of times it's more high-level conversations, meet and greet or whatnot, and identifying, more of the person itself and seeing if the core values align, as opposed to skill sets and whatnot. But I think the biggest thing that we've really intended to be is more so just transparent and honest up front. Making sure that any sorts of, let's say, conflicts of interest or whatnot can be removed before we even engage in that conversation. And then we hand it off to the appropriate person that is able to kind of see that through, as opposed to us touching that. Because when you hire grandma and you have to fire grandma, that makes the family reunion just a little bit awkward, So that's been kind of an intentional thing, is we want to make sure that we're removed just enough to the point to where, hey, we don't want to deny the right person, for that seat. I mean, if grandma is the best person, let's hire grandma. But I'm not going to be directly involved in the hiring process.
And I didn't even mean blood relations. I
totally get it. Yeah.
In general, there's this seeming juxtaposition, and most people identify as either a family or a sports team.
Sure.
We identify as a sports team because it's just what works and suits for us. I've enjoyed this conversation. I'm enjoying seeing where you guys are heading in the industry and the doors that you're opening up and how you're using your previous context to improve the quality of what's available for tenants and for owners. My parting question to you is this: if you could ask every self-managing landlord in the nation one question, what would it be?
It's a great question. I think one of the questions that I'd probably have a number of questions for them, but if I could ask them one question, I mean, it would probably be, what do they value most out of their property? What do they intend to achieve with their property? Or you said property manager, right?
Self-managing landlord.
Self-managing landlord. Okay. Then I would say, what's your intention, with your property? What is your intention? And does it provide you, by being self-managing and self-managing your property, does it provide you what the intent of having that property, or I guess is the end result, or is managing that by yourself giving you what you intend to achieve out of that property? I think that's probably one of the things, because I think it all starts with anybody. There's a lot of accidental landlords out there. There's a lot of self-managing landlords, and there's going to be more as the boomer generation continues to retire and continues to pass on assets to their younger, to their children and their children's children. And that I think for them to understand why they hold the property and what's their intention behind it is going to be a question that they need to ask themselves, probably even more so. But if I could spark that question in them, then maybe that would potentially even help the industry, especially when it comes to professionally managed. Like, I'm a big believer that professionally managed, properties are, the best, better off ultimately. But I think that, I think a lot of landlords are hesitant for the wrong reasons. And I think that a lot of times it comes down to the upfront dollar signs, the management fees, those, and they lose sight of what is the intent of the property. Is it, depreciation? Is it appreciation? Is it tax, tax based? Is it
preservation?
Yeah, exactly. Is it preservation? And I think that, if they really took a look, at what's their motivation or what's their intention behind having the asset, we would either see a bigger shift of those going into professionally managed to be able to allow them to achieve the goals that having a rental property, would achieve anybody. So,
dig it. That's a great live inquiry.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on, man. Until next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Always blessed.
Boom.
Thanks.
There we go.
Yes.
That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. You can check out other episodes along the way. If you're watching this on YouTube, appreciate a subscribe. Any comments, I'm always here to engage. If you're listening on an audio platform, would really appreciate a review. It's a great way to help other people find out about the show.